The Christmas doll. The package arrived just after sunset, left on my doorstep during the year's heaviest snowstorm. I hadn't ordered anything, nor was I expecting visitors, not on Christmas Eve. The box was nondescript, wrapped in brown paper and tied with coarse string, its edges damp from the snow. No return address, only my name scrawled in faded ink across the top. Curiosity won over caution. I carried it inside, shaking the frost from my coat as I set the package on the kitchen table. A faint, unfamiliar scent wafted from it, a mix of mothballs and something faintly metallic. Inside, nestled in yellowed tissue paper, was a doll. It was beautiful in a haunting way, its porcelain face ghostly pale, with painted lashes framing dull blue eyes that seemed to follow me as I lifted it from the box. Its lips were a soft, smudged pink, frozen in a slight, knowing smile. The doll wore a dress of ivory lace, though the fabric was discolored, its edges frayed as though it had spent decades in storage. At its base, I found a handwritten note folded into quarters. For the child who deserves her love. I frowned at the cryptic words, but the craftsmanship of the doll held my attention. It was unlike any I had seen, far more intricate than the other antique toys in my modest collection. On impulse, I placed the doll on the mantel above the fireplace, letting its eerie charm blend with the Christmas decorations. By nightfall, the storm raged stronger, howling winds rattling the windows and burying the streets in snow. I settled into my armchair, a mug of mulled wine in hand, staring at the fire as it crackled and danced. The doll sat quietly on the mantel, watching me, or at least that's how it felt. As the hours dragged on, the house seemed quieter than usual. The ticking of the grandfather clock was the only sound until it struck midnight. And then I heard it. A faint laugh. It was soft, high-pitched, and distant, like a child's giggle drifting through the wind. My breath caught as I scanned the room. The firelight flickered erratically, casting elongated shadows across the walls. For a moment, I thought I saw something move, a brief, almost imperceptible twitch of the doll's head. Shaking off the thought as an overactive imagination, I bolted the doors and went to bed. But that laugh followed me, echoing faintly in the stillness of the house. I woke to the sound of a faint scraping, like nails dragging lightly across wood. The clock read 3:15 a.m. My pulse quickened as I lay still, straining to hear over the storm outside. The sound came again, closer this time. Slowly, I sat up, the icy air pricking my skin as I turned toward the bedroom door. It was open, though I was certain I had closed it before going to bed. I told myself it was nothing, just the house settling, or maybe the wind sneaking through the old window panes. But as I swung my feet onto the floor, a soft creak came from the hallway. My breath caught. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling in the dark. Silence. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and ventured out, its narrow beam slicing through the shadows. The house was still. Too still. I crept down the hall, past the kitchen and into the living room. The doll wasn't on the mantel. My heart raced as I scanned the room, the beam of light darting over the furniture. The armchair, the coffee table, the fireplace, all untouched. And then I saw it. The doll was on the floor by the Christmas tree, seated upright in a way I hadn't left it. Its head tilted slightly, its glassy eyes catching the dim glow of the holiday lights. I stared at it for a long moment, rationalizing that it must have fallen during the night. Yet, the position was deliberate. Too deliberate. I picked it up hesitantly, its porcelain surface cold against my hands, and returned it to the mantel. But as I turned to leave, I swore I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sigh. The following days brought no comfort. Strange things began happening, small at first, unsettling but explainable. Ornaments fell from the tree despite no draft. The faint scent of roses lingered in the air, though I had no flowers in the house. My keys vanished only to reappear in places I hadn't been. But the doll, always the doll, seemed at the center of it all. Each time I passed the living room, its position seemed slightly different. Once its arm was extended, its tiny fingers pointing toward the hallway. Another time it was lying on its side, its smile seeming wider, its eyes unblinking. Desperate for answers, I scoured the internet, searching for anything about antique dolls or supernatural phenomena. Late one night, I found it, a faded photograph on an auction site listing a near-identical doll. The description read, Victorian-era creation, previously owned by the Van Clydes, rumored to be cursed. Last recorded owner disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Van Clydes. The name felt familiar. My stomach twisted as I remembered the story. A girl from that family had gone missing in the 1800s. Her parents found dead in their home. The doll, the curse, the laughter in the shadows. It all began to fit. I stared at the doll from across the room, my breath shallow as the firelight danced against its porcelain face. And then, as if sensing my fear, the doll turned its head. Slowly, deliberately, toward me. The turning point came on the third night. By then, the doll's movements were no longer subtle. They were deliberate. I could no longer rationalize them as tricks of the light or the restless effects of an old house. It was alive, or something within it was, and it wanted something from me. I slept with the door locked and a chair wedged under the handle, yet I still woke to the faint sound of its porcelain feet tapping against the wooden floor. I didn't leave my room until morning. When I finally mustered the courage to open the door, the doll was waiting for me, sitting upright in the middle of the hallway. Its smile seemed sharper, its tilted head a silent mockery of my terror. I hurled it into the basement. The slam of the door behind it felt like a temporary reprieve, but even as I turned the lock, I knew it wasn't over. The sense of unease didn't leave. Instead, it burrowed deeper, as though the house itself had absorbed the doll's malignant energy. I spent the day pacing, my thoughts spiraling into the morbid tales I'd unearthed in my research. The Van Clyde girl, the doll's original owner, had vanished on Christmas Eve. Her father was found strangled, her mother locked in the attic, babbling about the doll that watched. At sunset, I heard a faint sound from below. It was soft at first, a rhythmic creaking, like a rocking chair moving slowly back and forth. The basement door rattled once, then again, as if something inside was testing the lock. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, slamming my fist against the wood. Silence. I stepped back, my breath ragged. I didn't trust the reprieve. By nightfall, I barricaded myself in the living room, the lights blazing, the fire roaring. My phone trembled in my hand as I tried to call someone, anyone, but the lines were dead, my cell showing no signal. That was when I noticed it. The scent of roses wafting through the air again, stronger now, almost suffocating. My gaze darted to the mantel where the doll once sat, but it was empty. From the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move. I spun around, the fire poker in my hands trembling as I peered into the hallway. It stretched long and dark, the lights flickering as a faint giggle echoed from the basement stairs. "No," I whispered, backing away. And then it came. The sound of footsteps, tiny, uneven but purposeful, ascending the basement steps. The door creaked open, the lock falling away as though it had never been latched. The doll appeared in the doorway, bathed in shadows, its painted eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. It stood there for a long moment, its porcelain body jerking unnaturally as it began to move toward me. I swung the poker, but it was like trying to strike air. The doll dodged with inhuman speed, scuttling across the floor and climbing the armchair as if mocking me. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The room seemed to darken. The shadows stretched, swallowing the edges of the walls, until the only light came from the fire's glow. And then the doll spoke, not with words but with the voice of the Van Clyde girl, faint and pleading, echoing through the house. "Help me. Please. Help me." Her voice chilled me to my core, laced with something ancient and malevolent. I knew then that the doll wasn't a vessel for a single soul. It was a prison, a wretched trap that held the Van Clyde girl and something far older, far darker. And it wanted me to take her place. The air thickened, pressing against my lungs as the doll leapt from the chair, landing inches from my feet. Its head jerked up, the twisted smile breaking into a jagged crack that spread across its face like a fracture in the porcelain. The fire sputtered, casting wild, frantic shadows. As the doll's hand stretched toward me, I stumbled back, clutching the poker tightly. It advanced, dragging its tiny feet across the floor, the sound grating like nails on glass. "Help me!" the voice begged again, but this time it was layered, childlike sorrow interwoven with a guttural growl that wasn't human. I ran to the kitchen, grabbing the matches and a bottle of lighter fluid from under the sink. If this thing wanted to take me, I wasn't going without a fight. The doll followed, scuttling across the countertops as I doused the room in fluid. Its porcelain face twisted with rage as the flames from the match caught the drapes, roaring to life. The fire spread quickly, but the doll didn't retreat. It climbed the walls, its movements impossibly fast, its laughter ringing in my ears. The house groaned under the weight of the heat as smoke began to fill the air. And then I saw it. The doll's gaze flickered toward the fireplace. In that moment, I understood. The fireplace, the hearth of the house, wasn't just a source of warmth. It was a gateway, a threshold between worlds. If I could return the doll to the fire, I could sever its connection to this plane. Summoning every ounce of courage, I lunged at the doll, grabbing it with shaking hands. Its porcelain body burned like ice against my skin as it fought, scratching and clawing with jagged fingers. "Let me go!" the voice howled, but I held on, stumbling toward the flames. The moment the doll hit the fire, the house erupted in a deafening scream. Shadows writhed against the walls, the oppressive scent of roses replaced with sulfur. The doll cracked and splintered as the flames consumed it, its cries fading into a low, mournful wail. And then there was silence. I collapsed onto the floor, coughing as the fire began to die. The shadows receded, the house settling into an eerie stillness. For the first time in days, the air felt light, almost normal. But as I crawled toward the door, I heard it, a faint, childlike giggle, echoing from somewhere deep within the flames. The fire burned out by dawn, leaving behind only blackened wood and the bitter stench of smoke. The house was unnervingly silent, the oppressive energy that had haunted me seemingly gone. My hands trembled as I sifted through the ashes of the fireplace, searching for any trace of the doll. There was nothing. No porcelain shards, no fabric scraps. It was as though the flames had devoured it entirely, leaving only soot and embers. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief. Perhaps it was truly over. Perhaps the nightmare had ended. But as I stood, the faintest sound reached my ears. A child's giggle so soft it could have been mistaken for the whisper of wind. My breath hitched, my pulse pounding in my ears. I turned sharply, scanning the room. The living room was empty, bathed in the cold, gray light of morning. "Just my imagination," I muttered, though the words felt hollow. I left the house that afternoon, unable to endure another moment within its walls. My plan was simple: to check into a nearby motel and leave Blackwood the following morning, abandoning the house and everything in it. But even as I drove, the unease clung to me like a shadow. My rearview mirror reflected nothing but the empty road stretching behind me. Yet I felt watched, as though unseen eyes were fixed on me. I arrived at the motel, exhausted but wary. The room was small and dimly lit, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper. It felt cramped but mercifully normal. Yet as I unpacked, I froze. Sitting on the nightstand was a single object, a porcelain shard. My stomach twisted. I hadn't brought it. I knew I hadn't. My mind raced, searching for an explanation, but nothing made sense. As I reached for it, my fingers grazed the surface, and a piercing cold shot through me, freezing me in place. A soft, familiar laugh echoed through the room, louder now, as if spoken right behind me. "No," I whispered, turning slowly. The doll was there, seated on the edge of the bed, its porcelain face cracked and charred, its eyes glinting like twin embers. The smile, fractured but unmistakable, seemed wider now, more sinister. "You thought you could escape me?" a voice whispered. It was the girl's voice again, but deeper, laced with malice. I stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp as the doll stood, its movements jerky, wrong, as if its limbs were held by invisible strings. The room darkened, shadows spilling from the corners and stretching toward me like living tendrils. "What do you want?" I choked, my back pressing against the door. The doll cocked its head, its grin widening impossibly. "A new home, a new friend. You invited me in." "No!" I shouted, grabbing the chair and hurling it at the doll. It shattered into splinters, but the doll remained unscathed, its fiery eyes boring into me. The walls around me groaned as the shadows closed in, swirling like a black fog. The air grew colder, suffocating, as the doll's voice filled the room, chanting, mocking, laughing. I scrambled for the door, my hands fumbling with the lock. The giggling grew louder, joined by a cacophony of whispers. As the door swung open, I bolted into the freezing night, the motel hallway empty and eerily still. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. The engine roared to life, and I sped down the desolate road, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. The town disappeared behind me, but the feeling of being watched didn't fade. As I approached the highway, my headlights flickered, and the car sputtered to a stop. I swore under my breath, fumbling with the keys, but the engine was dead. I grabbed my phone, its screen glowing weakly, and dialed for help. No signal. A chill swept through the car, and my breath misted in the air. The faint scent of roses returned, clinging to the cabin. My heart sank as I turned to the passenger seat. The doll sat there, its head tilted, its fractured smile frozen in mockery. This time, it didn't laugh. It simply watched, its fiery eyes gleaming in the dark. The last thing I heard was a soft whisper, "You'll never leave me." And then the world plunged into darkness.